Hello and welcome to Myth Monsters. My name is Erin and I'll be your host for these little snack bite-sized podcasts on folklore and mythical monsters from around the world. These podcasts focus on the actual cryptids, folklore and mythic monsters from global mythology, rather than focusing on the full stories of heroes and their big adventures. I'll also be dropping in some references that they have to recent culture and where you can see these represented in modern day content so that you can learn more and get as obsessed as I am about these absolute legends of the mythological world. To be honest, I've spent most of this summer already crammed into my home office, either playing video games or studying or looking for jobs, and my cats have been particularly disruptive. So if you hear them in the background, I've tried desperately to clip it out, but that happens. But this episode comes at a perfect time for me to appreciate how cute and small they are in comparison to some bigger cats out there. So let's talk about big cats this week, as we're heading on over to the wonderful and hopefully currently chilly Australia to discuss a strange cryptid, the Blue Mountains Panther. Okay, firstly, just a precursor, this is going to be a very strange monster to describe this week because it's super basic in terms of its normal description. It's just a normal panther. The Blue Mountains Panther is typically described as a normal panther, as I said. And these are massive black cats that can be found across Asia, South America and Africa usually. They have big teeth, big claws, 4 legs, and they don't particularly enjoy the company of humans. They are jungle cats, so they hang about in trees and are awesome climbers. They're also not technically their own species, if you didn't know that. Fun fact about panthers. The panther is just a mutant jaguar or leopard that just doesn't have spots and is black all over. However, the mutation is common enough to have its own variation name, and therefore the panther was born. The Blue Mountains Panther is slightly different because it is believed to be a panther who roams the Australian wilderness near the Blue Mountains in New South Wales, southeast Australia. Now, what makes this monster special is that panthers are not native to Australia, and no one knows how it appeared, and no one has been able to capture one, so it has become a cryptid in its own right. It doesn't have any special powers. It's not got mega camouflage skills, even though it's very good at evading capture. Panthers are naturally super strong, as they're big cats, and can tear apart flesh with both their claws and their teeth, and they run at super fast speed. So even though they're not anything special in comparison to normal panthers, they're still super dangerous. There have been sightings since the 1800s, so there is a thought that maybe this is one panther that's been alive all this time, but I don't think that's a particularly widely accepted belief. It is not an immortal singular panther, most likely. Panthers do live completely independently, and they breed like normal mammals, like you would a house cat. The females are the hunters, and they eat smaller animals such as deer, antelope, goats, and they can have litters of up to 3 cubs per pregnancy. Of course, I will say that if you ever see a big cat in the wild, do not approach it, please. They are not like your common house cat, and whilst they do like a cuddle if they've been brought up by humans, they are most likely going to try and eat you or just rip your face off. To avoid being eaten by a big cat, this is just a survival tip by the way, just in case you ever find yourself in this scenario. You must maintain eye contact, make yourself big as possible, back off slowly, and never turn your back and never run from one. If they do attack you, you just have to attack back and hope that you set up a will before you went on the hiking trip that led to your ultimate demise. You most likely will not survive this encounter. That is, to be honest, all I have to say on the matter. The grit of this episode is mostly in the origin section, so I will move on to that. So, let's talk about etymology. I don't know what to tell you. I don't know what to tell you that you don't already know. They're from the Blue Mountains, and it looks like a panther. So that's about it this week. A bit bland. But hey, At least you can't mistake the name for anything else, I guess. It is also known as the Lithgow tiger, after one of the towns that sees it the most, just in case you see that anywhere as well. But they are the same thing. Right, let's get on to something more interesting. The history. This monster has been rumoured to be around since the 1800s. However, through the last 20 years, there have been over 500 recorded sightings of the Blue Mountains Panther across New South Wales. The reports mostly come from the 90s and noughties, with 39 reports in 2003, including in 2002 when a boy that year was badly scratched by a big cat outside his house. Most of the reports are of a big, black, shiny cat outside in the evenings in gardens or wooded areas from afar, with witnesses saying they were much bigger than normal house cats. But what is super interesting about this is, firstly, we're in Australia where the ecosystem is immensely fragile and everything is noticed, but also Australia has a really interesting history with cats. So of course, cats are not native to Australia. They were first introduced in 1788 with the first fleet of British colonists to the island, and quickly became a household pet in the 1830s to 90% of the population as pest control. They also did a mass release of cats for pest control in Victoria as rabbit hunters, but they just didn't think about how quickly those cats would go feral and how much they would breed. This led to a massive overpopulation problem with non-native species to Australia. To this day, feral and domesticated outdoor cats kill up to 110 native animals a year, including birds, mammals and reptiles. This technically makes them an invasive species, and the feral cats did get to massive sizes in this ecosystem, and in 2005, a cat was actually found to be 69 inches from tail to nose, and was actually found to be a feral overgrown cat, which could explain our panther issue. But it's super interesting, something you might not think about when you think about cats and pets, and then you think about Australia. It's super interesting. Another explanation of how the Blue Mountains Panther came about is potentially circuses. Circuses were a big thing in the 18 and 1900s, which included big cat acts. Of course, this is now illegal and it was very much morally shunned much later on. Circuses are notoriously horrendous at looking after exotic animals, and some were known to be released into the Australian wild. We also have quite a big issue of a black market pet trade, where you are able to purchase a big cat, probably at a small age, for big money. However, these people realistically just want a status symbol, and once they realise they can't look after their pet lion or tiger, or panther in this case, they release it into the wild, thinking they're doing them a favour, which, of course, does not lead to that. It leads to the animal dying or being captured, or ending up hurting someone. Again, this has actually been recorded to happen in these regions, so it's not an absolutely wild idea. Lastly, and the most probable cause of this might surprise you, and it's World War II. You might be thinking, well, hey, that was in Europe, and sure, the Americans got involved. But yes, you're right. However, Australia did get involved, as it was still part of the British Empire at this point. They were pulled in. During this time, American soldiers were actually stationed in Australia, and they'd come back from North Africa, from tours, and they would pick up exotic animals as mascots, in air quotes here. There was even a record of one ship bringing back 1,650 animals, including bear cubs and lion cubs, and this is the widely accepted reason as to why there might be big cats roaming the Australian countryside now. The government body in charge of this is the Department for Primary Industries in Australia, and they have done multiple inquiries on this issue in 1999, 2003, 2009 and 2013. In the first report, it noted that, difficult as it seems to accept, the most likely explanation of the evidence is the presence of a large feline predator, which led to, of course, astonishment in the scientific community that the government had admitted the panther's presence. However, then in 2003, the government reported again that nothing found in this review conclusively proves the presence of free-ranging, exotic large cats in New South Wales. But this cannot be discounted and seems more likely than not on available evidence. That was then followed in 2009 with "There is no scientific evidence found during this review that conclusively proves the presence of free-ranging exotic large cats in New South Wales. But a presence cannot be discounted, and it seems more likely than not on available evidence that such animals do exist in New South Wales. Whilst information has been provided, there is still nothing to conclusively say that a large black cat exists." Lastly, in 2013, to close the argument, they said, "The sightings and other evidence presented, mostly from the Hawkesbury region, are at best prima facie evidence, and that large feral cats can be found throughout most parts of Australia, and has been suggested that sightings of black panthers may be the result of people mistaking feral cats, or even the rear view and tails of animals such as the black swamp wallaby for panthers, particularly in dense bushland." Unfortunately, there is rarely sufficient evidence such as clear photos or footprints to warrant further investigation. And that's all they had to say. That's all the government said for the last 12 years about the issue. So I guess watch this space. But why is this such a big deal for such a normal animal? Why am I talking about this in a Mythical Monsters podcast? Now this is where I'm just going to tell you some great things. This is because it's a cryptid. And what's more, it's a specific type of cryptid. A cryptid is defined as a creature whose existence is in question due to lack of evidence, but cited in multiple witness accounts, and not sourced from an ancient civilization or religion, which is exactly what this monster is. The Blue Mountains Panther, whilst a normal panther by what we know, should not be there. It is a phenomena, so of course we're covering it. And why shouldn't it be there? Well, I kind of mentioned this earlier, but Australia and their ecosystem is incredibly important, but also incredibly fragile. If you've ever watched Border Control Australia, you'll know what I'm talking about. Australia is an island, and almost half of that island is uninhabited due to weather, terrain, and creatures that are native to the Australian outback that are super dangerous to humans. We all know that Australia has sharks, spiders, snakes, cassowaries, but what they definitely don't have is panthers. This means that the panthers, because they definitely didn't swim across from Asia, got there somehow. Hence the mystery. Hence the cryptid definition. Also, New South Wales is very human populated, and seeing a wild big cat must be really scary and pretty weird knowing that they don't come from here. It's like me seeing a lion a few times in an Essex park. That would be weird. But if multiple people see it, that is how a cryptid is born, baby. Now, I mentioned they're a specific type of cryptid, and they are known as phantom cats or alien big cats, ABCs. These are cats that appear outside of their native spaces and have been reported across the world. Usually, if they're found, they're identified as escaped zoo animals or exotic pets. However, some of their hunts go on for long enough to fall into that cryptid category. So let's talk about some of these similar monsters. Of course, we have the wonderful big cats of the UK, which are really prevalent within British folklore, especially throughout the 18th and 19th centuries, and are still spotted today in the wilds of Yorkshire, Devonshire. We do also have the Catsif from the Scottish Highlands, who was technically a witch in disguise, but moved around as a big cat. That one is really prevalent as a folklore tale within Scotland, so it is quite a big mythical figure, and there are a lot of books written about the big phantom cats in the UK. Moving back over to Australia too, we have the extinct thylacine, which is often thought to not be extinct by cryptozoologists, and is hunted for as a cryptid now. These native Australian fossils, realistically, are similar to wildcats, but they have tiger stripes. These were once real animals, they did go extinct. Some people believe that they are not extinct, that is how they are a cryptid, and apparently are still spotted across Australia. But you can learn more about them in my specific thylacine episode that I have in the Myth Monsters catalogue. I will mention that the belief in the Blue Mountains Panther is still pretty widespread in the area, and there are loads of people still researching this, including the Grossvale Group, who are the leading research group for this topic and this monster. So, continue to watch this space, and if they ever prove it, I will come back and amend all of my facts here, I promise. Now let's move on to modern media. There is not a lot for this one, as I'm sure you can imagine, so I found a bunch of things about panthers, including the namesake Marvel character, of course. Now for art, there's absolutely nothing on this one because of the nature of the beast, pardon the pun. But you can find all of the photo evidence that people have collected online, so I'd recommend having a look at that if you're really interested enough. In movies, we have The Pink Panther, Cat People, Black Panther, Wakanda Forever, Apocalypto, The Emperor's New Groove, and Jungle Cruise. For TV, we have Onyx Equinox, Bleach, Angel, Fairy Tale, The Pink Panther, Charmed, Magical Girl, Lyrical Nanoa, Merlin, Chaotic, Thundercats, Tailspin, Johnny Quest, Wild New World, Defenders of the Earth, The Simpsons, She-Ra, Princess of Power, The Transformers, The Sentinel, The Munsters, He-Man and the Masters of the Universe, Gargoyles, and Cyber 6. In video games, we have ones such as Age of Empires 3, Monster Hunter, Mortal Kombat 11, The King of Fighters, The Elder Scrolls Online, Them's Fightin' Herds, Brutal Legend, Knights of Valor, Hero of Sparta, Golden Axe 3, Hotline Miami, Killer Instinct, Mega Man 02, Tales of Rebirth, Star Fox, Luigi's Mansion 3, Quest for Glory, World of Warcraft, Warcraft, and The World Ends With You. My book recommendation this week is actually some books about this exact thing. Snarls from the Tea Tree, Australia's Big Cat Folklore by David Waldron, and Australian Big Cats, An Unnatural History of Panthers by Mike Williams, which massively helped me with my research this week, so will be super interesting if you're into that too. There is also the English equivalent, I talked about this earlier, The British Big Cat Phenomenon, Environmental Impact, Politics, Cover-Ups and Revelations by Jonathan McGowan, if you're interested in big cat studies from over here in the UK too, which is where they are most commonly seen if you're interested in phantom cat stuff. But now it's time for Do I Think They Existed? Well, the thing is, they technically do exist. We all know big cats do exist. However, does a panther exist out in the Australian Blue Mountains? Probably not. But I'm also saying not absolutely not. There is always a possibility that a creature we don't know about could end up somewhere we don't expect. Australia does have zoos that have panthers, and we know that they were introduced during the old circuses routes. Taronga Zoo currently has a panther, and Australia Zoo has a load of big cats. So there's absolutely no guarantee that there's no escaped panthers ever in history. But there's also the point that panthers aren't technically real either. They're just black leopards or jaguars. And again, they aren't native to Australia, but can be found over there. So at least there's that. We do have a lot of big cat reports in the UK, and that's why that book has been written, because we have so many sightings, and it is most common over here in the UK. But nothing has ever amounted to anything. Maybe someone is just feeding their black house cat a little too much. I know I am certainly guilty of this at the very least. Ripley, my eldest, is starting to look like a little panther herself these days. She is quite rotund, while Scully, my other cat, is black and white, so she's not quite a panther-looking one, but she is slightly large. But anyway, that's not to say that I don't love a cryptid. You all know I do, and I think this one is super fun, until they find a stray jaguar and it eats someone, I guess. But what do you think? Does the Blue Mountains Panther roam the Australian wilds? Let me know on social media. I would love to know what you think about this one, and if you believe they truly do. I was worried that I wouldn't have enough information this week for this monster. I mentioned it in my last episode that I was scared I wouldn't have enough info, but I'm glad I've managed to get as much out of the research that I could find as I did. So I hope you've enjoyed learning about the Blue Mountains Panther, as I have. I really have. Next week, we're heading over to Eastern Europe for a super interesting monster, because we're looking at a human hybrid, which hasn't happened for a little while, and this is a very literal human hybrid. It's from a mating of a human and a vampire. So get ready to bring some garlic and silver for the dampier next time. For now though, thank you so much for listening. It's been an absolute pleasure as always. If you enjoyed this podcast, please give it a rating on the service you are listening on. I've got loads of social media for any questions or suggestions on what monsters to cover next, and I'd really love to hear from you. The social media handles for TikTok, YouTube and Instagram are Myth Monsters Podcast, and the Twitter is Myth Monsters Pod. I'm also now on Blue Sky under Myth Monsters, and all of our content can be found at mythmonsters.co.uk, and you can find us on Good Pods, Buy Me a Coffee and Patreon if you want to help me fund the podcast too. Come join the fun though, share this with your pals, they might love me as much as you do, but for now, stay spooky, and I'll see you later, babes.